Now, Carol, you have a reputation of being a very trustworthy person, a person of high integrity. That just didn't happen. You've had to work at that. But if you were advising young people, whether they be in business, in law, or any other profession, in terms of the concept of trust, what are some of the do's and don'ts as they are trying to develop their careers to making certain that they have a trustworthy and have a reputation as being trustworthy?
So how would you do it when you start? I mean, I think that the issues of simply always being honest with people is, and I think it extends to obviously when you say something, it needs to be true, but it is perfectly fair in a business context, as I said before. If you're not going to answer the question, just say I'm not going to answer the question, rather than ducking it or trying to be cute about it. To say that's just not. I'm not going to respond to that. And if they say why, I'm not going to tell you why I'm not going to respond to that, but I'm just not. So I think that's fine. They can then figure out what the shape of the problem is, but you've sort of given them some clarity in terms of where you're going. I think the other part of creating trust, it's as I say, partly what you do say, but it's also how you behave when there is nothing to say. So to simply let people twist, and if you're expecting me to get back to you, but I don't really have anything to say, so I'm not going to call you. That's a stressful situation for the other person.
It's like the lapse, eh?
Yeah,
Lapse in time,
exactly.
eh?
Yeah, exactly.
You're on the phone and there's nobody there.
Right. It's very stressful for the other side, either because the point matters to them, or frankly because they'd like to get on with their day, and they don't know whether they're supposed to be waiting for this or not. So when people say, "Oh yeah, she's good to work with," or good guy, I don't think that ever has anything to do with whether people are tough or not. Because you can be polite and tough. I think it has to do with whether everybody is sort of facilitating business carrying on. We're not trying to do things to be difficult, and in fact, we're trying to make things as smooth for everybody as possible. It makes it much more likely our clients are going to get to where they need to get to.
So you're representing a major client. You've developed your mandate, you know where you're going, and you have to deal with the other side. Could be multi-party, could be just single. What do you do when the person on the other side is being somewhat deceptive?
It's very disappointing. It's very disappointing when that happens. The first thing that I would do, and this only again works if there's a relationship with the client, where they understand that my assessment of these things is I wouldn't say this lightly. But if I say to them, look, I think they're retreating. I think that they're not being truthful about this. I think they're not telling us the entire story. Very important to get that information to the client. And I would just call the person on it. I would say that seems incomplete to me. That seems inconsistent. I don't call people a liar, but it seems inconsistent. It seems different from what you said before. It doesn't align with what we're seeing over here. Help me understand how these pieces fit together. So
you make them account for what they have said or what they have
sure,
done.
explain to them why I'm having the sense that I'm having. And if there is a relationship there, if they trust me, normally what will happen is they care about what I think. So if I say to them, this is unusual in my experience, and I am really uncomfortable with this, and I'm going to have to go and talk to the client about it. But what do you want me to say about the fact that you said this yesterday and you're saying this now, and they are just black and white? How am I going to explain that?
And what's been your experience? Have they reacted the way you expect them to act?
You normally get something back. I think
you get clarification.
You get something. Whether or not it's clear, I mean, if they're actually lying to you, it's helpful because I don't think I've ever had anybody say, I'm not going to talk about that any further. They will try to explain to me why it's not black and white, or sometimes I'm wrong, and their explanation introduces a fact that changed it, and they didn't actually appreciate either that I had remembered the previous. They didn't think it was important to me, or they didn't think I would remember, and the fact that it has changed. It wasn't meant to be any kind of a signal. It just changed, and it wasn't intended to send any kind of a message. And so if you're having that, at least in my experience, if I'm having that sense that I'm getting I'm getting messages that are not fitting, just say it.
What's been your experience in terms of not necessarily the deceptive person, but the person or persons on the other side, including counsel, are just difficult, troublesome?
Well, in a number of cases, I or somebody else on the team, I'm thinking of a couple of specific situations, again, you call them on it. I remember, again, was years ago, there was a lawyer who just kept screaming at me. He would just scream at me. And I finally said, look, I'm going to hang up now, and I'll call you back in half an hour, and we can start this again without the screaming. And actually, that worked. He just, I think probably with somebody who had an anger management issue, I probably didn't want to be perceived that way, and we just restarted, and it was fine. In other cases, you say to the person, look, this attitude that you're projecting is clear to everybody, and it is unhelpful. It's not helping your client, and it certainly isn't helping us. And so here is how you're being read. And there really, in my experience, there are not that many people who don't care how they're being perceived. Sometimes they don't appreciate it, or they don't recognize that what they consider to be a strong, hard approach to things is being perceived of as, what a jerk. Nobody wants to be perceived that way.
Tell me about the media. How do you deal with the media in the midst of a negotiation? Client says, I don't want to deal with the media. You deal with the media.
Well, I think getting the right communications people, always critical. I spend a lot of time talking to the press on whether it's in an interview, but in a lot of cases on background. So I think again, it's you talked about relationships earlier on. I think the relationships really matter. So if I were to phone somebody to say, I think what you wrote was maybe not quite right. Do you want some more information? I would expect that they would return my call, and that's in anybody's business. That's a lot to be able to say. If I call so-and-so, I expect that they'll return my call. That's a pretty powerful thing to be able to say. I think that the approach to communications is critical. I don't think that there are two buckets of things that people will say. People will often say, after they've analyzed something difficult, they will often say, well, that's a governance problem. To which I say, well, yeah, I think everything's kind of a governance problem in some way. The other big overarching theme that you see in any difficult situation is there's been a communications problem. Somebody is not understanding, or the press, in your example, the press is not seeing things the way we see it. The shareholders are not seeing things the way we see it. And why is that? Is it because we're wrong? And it takes us not very long to conclude, no, it's not because we're wrong. Well, there must be the way in which they're hearing it. And that's whether it's a legal document, whether it's the way you're talking to clients about a transaction that's ongoing, or to the regulators, or to the press. The press are just terrifically important in terms of framing other people's understanding of a situation. And so it is very worthwhile investing the time to make sure that they have the resources that they need in order to get behind your story the way you want them to.
I've been asked from time to time by clients to respond to a media inquiry about a negotiations. And I've always told my clients, well, there's risk here. Mm-hmm. I can give them background, but if you want me to go on the record, that can be a risky proposition because it could irk the other side for us being in the media. And I found clients, they don't want to upset the other side, but they want to correct the record, so the background information. But on the other hand, when you have to go on the record in representing a client in the media who wants you to do that, one has to be pretty careful what you say and what you don't say.
Be very prepared. So it's key message, key message, key message. There are three things that I want this reporter to hear, and it doesn't matter that much what they're asking me. It's key message, key message, key message.
In and out.
I think so, yeah.
Tell me, if you will, in terms of as you proceed with a particular negotiations, are there anybody, or are there individuals that you've watched over the years that you would deem to be top quality negotiators?
Yeah, oh yeah. I mean, there are some people who are very effective. And why so? Interesting question. So why are they so effective?
That's the second question.
I think that as I'm thinking through the various business leaders that I've had the honor to work with over the years, I think the thing that makes them successful is consistency. So if they say X, people should believe that they mean X. I think that people who are not afraid to say, I have reconsidered that, or I understand your perspective on that. I actually, when we started this, I didn't see it that way, but now that you've been talking to me about it, I do understand your perspective on that. It's hard for me for X, Y, and Z reasons. I have to go back to my board. It causes this problem, but I hear you on that issue, and let's see what we can do about that. People who do it that way, I think, end up, they create a bigger basket of solutions, because everybody's now working to see where we could move the pieces so that you get what you want and I get what I want. I mean, it's very standard negotiating theory that what we need to understand is where the client is trying to get to, not where they say they're trying to get to. And so people who do that effectively, I think, can end up growing the bucket of solutions, the basket of solutions, so that everybody gets what they want. There is no value in a deal that falls apart a week after it's signed. There's no value in a deal that just ends up putting your client in the middle of a lawsuit. So you want a deal that works.
So how deep do you drill with your own client in terms of his or her expectations on a particular negotiations? What are some of the options? I mean, you're anticipating certain things that will come from the other side. Or does this become an ongoing process? You don't do it all up front, but it has to be done over a period of time.
Well, the issues will come up over the course of the negotiations, so given that you can't anticipate all of the issues, you'll have to respond as you go. I think what the reason that you use counsel is because there may be a range of either legal options that they weren't aware of, or for what I do with boards and shareholders, very often what people are looking for is, what is normal? Is it acceptable? Here's a range of options, but whoever does it this way, I mean, is that really what people would consider? And can you even suggest that? Have you ever seen that done before? That's probably one of the questions I get asked most. If I say, why don't we could do it this way? Well, has that ever been done before? Have you seen that done before? People want to be able to say that is standard practice. It is acceptable to put that kind of solution forward. And that's why it ends up being important in a lot of cases to have somebody who's experienced in conducting that kind of a negotiation, so that you can say with some authority, there's no reason in the world we couldn't do it this way. It's done this way all the time.
Can you share with us any of your examples of very difficult negotiations and why they were difficult?
Yeah, not specifically by client name. There have been situations in which you've got a client who is really just looking for the best solution, being met by somebody who has got ambitions to be seen in a particular way in a public light. So they want to create a name for themselves. They want to be able to, it's a little bit self-aggrandizement on their part. And so they're demanding things that are not, they don't really belong in the deal. And so the client, in my example, the client I'm representing, is just confused about what it is they're looking for or why they're insisting on particular points. Those can be very difficult negotiations, because the person who is looking to build the reputation may be acting out of character to begin with. They may not be doing it very well because they're trying to be tough when they're not really. Or they think that they have to get to this point so that the public will see their big win, but they don't really have any chips to deal with. And so all it's doing is dragging out the negotiation. So that would be another example of when you have to to make sure that your client understands that there is a public perception thing that this person is worried about. If that's not a negative to you, it may be, but if it's not a negative to you, let them have it. But that's really the issue in that kind of a dynamic when you're dealing particularly in the public company space or in the government space. There are countless issues like that where it's really it's not a negotiation between the two people. One of them has got a range of stakeholders that aren't really at the table, and that's who they're playing to. So we're not really negotiating just with that person. We're negotiating with all.
It's really
we discover.
multi-party.
But they're not there. But they're
not there.
But we don't get to talk to those people, and so they will say in government, people will be worried about how it's going to be perceived by the people. It may be that people are worried about how it's going to be perceived by their customers. It could be that very often what people are concerned about is what is the investor community going to think about this. But their perception, their concerns about that are hidden from us. We don't really even know we might be able to discern that those stakeholders are there, but their perception of how those stakeholders are going to react for some reason is not something that we can see. So trying to figure out how to get that on the table, you have to identify the issue first, but figuring out what it is, what their concern is, and whether there's some other way to feed it.
Now, do you have a particular protocol that you use for the regulator? I mean, you've indicated earlier on that you try to keep the regulator up to date in terms of what is transpiring. Do you do that verbally? Do you do that through written communications? Do you advise the other side?
It depends. It depends so much on the regulator. I mean, usually the regulator will establish their expectations. If they haven't, I'm not sure I necessarily always ask them what their expectations are because I might want to shape their expectations. Okay. So if I said, look, I don't think there's much going on this week, but I will let you know by the end of the week where we are. I would just make sure we did let them know at the end of the week, but it's pretty helpful not to have them phoning me every day to say, give me an update. What's going on, right? Yeah. Or if we're saying, very often what will happen is we're going to file something that requires the regulator to devote a lot of resources to reviewing it, and they need to get the shape of their own time in order. And so keeping them up to date on that kind of thing is helpful to the relationship and ultimately to the review.
Final question. If you were advising young people who are just graduating from university, trying to get a job, develop a career, whether it be in a profession or business school, what have you, what are some things that you would want to share with them to be successful in their chosen careers?
Well, the first thing I would say is that there is never a straight line to where you're going to end up. I don't know anybody, particularly anybody who's successful. I'm sure people often ask you, well, David, how did you even do this? I'd like to mimic your career. I'm sure you would say, wow, I'm not sure somebody can do that twice. I think you have to be open to the opportunities as they present themselves. Understand yourself well enough to know what will make you happy and what you're going to be good at, but stay open to as different turns in the road come, stay open to it. I think it's really important to understand that the people you meet now are always going to be there. I'm still dealing with people that I met really early on in practice. Now that I've established my own firm, I have people that I haven't heard from in years calling me with referral work, for which I'm very grateful, but I had no idea that there was still a connection in their mind. So I hope that came from a positive relationship. But you never know who can help you and who can hurt you. And so without being insincere, and you need to make sure that you're getting your job done, I think making sure that you're presenting yourself as someone that people are happy to deal with will stand you in good stead for the rest of your career. If you burn people at any point, that will smolder and last forever and will hurt you in ways that you'll never be able to anticipate.
That's good advice. On behalf of the Ted Rogers School of Management, the faculty and the students, I want to express our appreciation to you for joining us on the Ryerson Negotiation Project, and thank you for your insightful suggestions as it relates to negotiations. Thank you, Carol.
Great pleasure, David. Thank you.
Thank you.